Justin Cross, thank you so much for speaking to us on Talk Beliefs all the way from Los Angeles. You are a motivational speaker, personal development coach, and a musician, and an author of Exile to Epic, a shunning survival kit for people who, like yourself, were cast out of a high control group. And in your case, this was the Jehovah's Witnesses. So how are you doing today?
Doing excellent, Mark. Just so thankful to be here. Thankful that you gave me the opportunity to come on your program.
Now, this interview is going to divide neatly into two sections. First, we're going to talk about your early life growing up in the Jehovah's Witnesses and the events that led to your shunning and ultimately your leaving the faith. We'll then go on to how you picked yourself up and literally found your voice as both a singer and motivational speaker. So let's just start with growing up, JW. I assume you did all the normal witness things, going door to door, lots of meetings. So what was your life like back then?
Sure. Yeah, you nailed it. It was the classic life of starting early on. I was born into it. So my father is a 30 plus year now veteran of being an elder. And wow. My mother is what you would call the equivalent of an elder's wife. And I had a lot of peer pressure because my older sister dropped out of high school to regular pioneer, which means at that time it was 90 hours of ministry service. And so she set this like impossible bar, which was to dedicate every moment you had to the ministry. And then my younger sister as well is also a regular pioneer. And I was the middle child, but as early as 6 years old, I was doing the door-to-door knocking and all kind of suited up and ready to kind of like do the lifelong journey of being a good minister of Jehovah.
Justin, could you go into a little bit more detail about what exactly it's like to grow up Jehovah's Witness?
Sure. Yeah, there's a lot of misconceptions about some of the mainstream fundamentalist religions like your Scientology or your Mormon or Jehovah's Witness, but it is a pretty extreme group, I would say. For example, there's no holidays, no personal birthdays. There's the disfellowshipping process where that essentially means it's the equivalent of like an excommunication or a shunning, right, in other religions. Right. And that's if you don't meet certain criteria or if the elders simply decide you are cut off, overnight from your friends, your family, your loved ones. No college, no politics, no joining the army, no blood transfusions, which is kind of a weird thing. And there's a lot of reasoning to give, around that. No swearing, no cigarettes, no sex before marriage. You're only supposed to marry people in the faith. You're only supposed to associate with individuals in the faith. So it really skews your entire social perception of how to interact with other humans, which are called worldly people. So I'm afraid, Mark, both you and I are currently worldly people.
Proud of it.
Yeah, exactly. And so, it just kind of affects every asset or every aspect of your life. And for me, it was decades involved and engaged with, an obsession over just trying to sort of please this God, Jehovah, and his son, Jesus Christ. So it's a pretty extremist concept and construct. And usually once somebody finally hears that sort of exhausting list, they get more of a colored picture. And I think the scariest part to leave you with is that for most of those things, you can get disfellowshipped. And so there's this constant fear and shame associated with like something as simple as masturbation, all the way up to smoking a cigarette. Again, these are all things that you can be disfellowshipped for. So it's just sort of like really tough combination of guilt and shame and overall a bunch of rhetoric.
And a lot of fear. You said the word fear. That comes up a lot with Jehovah's Witnesses, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Now, at one point, you discovered that you had musical talent and that eventually that would open up a lot of doors for you. But it also spelled the beginning of the end of your life as a JW, didn't it?
For sure, Mark. I think the painful part was that I was really just nowhere near as good as my sisters at sort of being a Jehovah's Witness. I wasn't book smart enough. I wasn't articulate enough. But I picked up a guitar and took a immediate liking to it. And I was writing songs right away. And so my father allowed me to put together a demo that I paid for just for a couple of songs. And we sent it out to a couple record labels sort of just on a whim. It's mainly something that I wanted to just see because I thought the music was good. And sure enough, I got a call from a record label executive at Reprise Records. And this was the first time, Mark, that I felt validated in my entire adult existence. I was around 18 or 19, something along that age group. And I just felt like my art was finally appreciated and validated, that this important person that had founded some significant mainstream pop artists was taking a liking to my message and my music. And so we pursued it, and I was able to actually go to some events and eventually graduate towards looking at an engagement in a business environment with a record label deal. And what happened that all of your viewers will appreciate is what I would consider to be tragic, and is one of the greatest regrets of my life, which is that I met with the elders in the congregation, and they wrote a letter to the Society of Jehovah's Witnesses to get added insight on what do you do with somebody who's checking all the boxes of spiritual qualifications, but is pursuing the entertainment business, which is specifically forbid in the Jehovah's Witness religion. There's only one industry that they shame and say you cannot do as it relates to a secular career. Okay. And it's the entertainment business. And that's not to be confused with those that were grandfathered in, like Prince and others. But the point is they sat down and said, listen, here is your ultimatum. You can either continue to pursue music and be stripped of all your privileges in the congregation, or we will allow you to, continue, or excuse me, you can do that, or you have to completely give it up, and then you continue to move forward in the congregation. And see, the reason that this is such an impossible decision is you can never get married if you aren't advancing in the congregation. And so I was still a virgin, hoping to one day have sex. And honestly, that was such an important drive for me that I was like, listen, I will put down this guitar for Jesus, so to speak. And I didn't touch music again for a decade later, because the older men in the congregation shared scriptures about how the earthly demonic expressions of the heart that don't originate with Jehovah, they originate with the devil and Satan, and how I'm supposed to glorify Jehovah himself with my words, my lyrics. Yes. And so, I had a song called like Teaspoon of Lust, and that offended them. And so, it's just one of those heartbreaking things that I wish I would have known what I know now. And I'm sure your viewers, maybe there's someone out there in this world right now that's trying to make this artistic decision for themselves. I really do feel like that was robbed from me, and an entire career was robbed from me in my 20s.
And that's what we're hoping that will happen with this interview, isn't it, Justin? That we will inspire people, especially people who are in Jehovah's Witnesses, perhaps still in or just left, who feel that they are worthless because they're told, they're only as good as how good their pioneering is, or how good as their love of Jehovah is.
Mark, you speak so eloquently about it, and that's exactly what it is you're kind of telling yourself, I'm doing it for the right reasons. And I was fully convinced that I was making a massive sacrifice. In fact, the brothers had convinced me that I was literally coming up against this sort of great culmination of the big test that they also talk about, that there's usually this culminating moment where you really have got almost an impossible decision, and that's when you can have loyalty to Jehovah, similar to how Abraham was about to sacrifice his son. That's how intense his faith was. And so I sort of put myself in that category just to sort of get through it somehow.
But it was when a spiritual mentor expressed some of his own doubts to you that you really started your own questioning of the faith. Isn't that right? Yes,
exactly. I was actually up in New York visiting a dear friend who I had grown up with in the truth, as it's called. And, and we were sitting back drinking some wine late at night, and I was a ministerial servant at the time, so I had moved my way up considerably and made these sacrifices. So I was recognized as, a pretty stand-up Jehovah's Witness, and I was relevant in the congregation and giving public sermons, and he was too. And so I kind of made him proud, and we were kind of reveling in our progress in the eyes of Jehovah God and the organization. But a little bit of wine and the rocking chair, and he mentioned some doubts that he had, some fundamental doubts. And of course, I instinctively went into preaching mode, as that was my personality at the time, where I sort of was like, we're going to pray about this and you're going to come back to Jehovah. Don't you worry about it. You're just straying off, right? And so here's what actually happened. And this is when I became obsessed with the subconscious mind. The things that he mentioned to me went down into the depths of, if you will, my subconscious. And it was a couple of weeks later, I almost felt it physically hit that there was validating components, not only to the words that he said, but they resonated with doubts that I had pushed down so deep inside of myself, Mark, that I just I cannot put in words what it's like to have those things sprout and begin to flourish and say, okay, I have to deal with these doubts. Not only do I respect that man, I respect what he said, and I've also felt this way for a period of time. Let me begin a journey of self-discovery to address these things dead on. And if I'm being honest with you, I thought for sure I would discover that my doubts would be rectified. And indeed, it was not the case.
And did you think you were the only one with these particular doubts? And when you heard this guy say virtually the same thing, that was a shock to you?
It was definitely a shock, Mark, and it was embarrassing. And it was like, this reflected immediately a lack of faith. This reflected a failure of me drawing close enough to Jehovah, as it were. And it instinctively feels like a betrayal of your soul. So in my case, I lost my wife of 9 years over this religious divide. And so for me to even begin entertaining that this religion and this entire construct could be incorrect, invalid, or not serving me and not what I want to do with my life was literally a moment of stepping into a total path change of my entire paradigm of existence, if that makes sense. Right. So even to start entertaining this is like this big undertaking to really honor the doubts that you truly have. So my heart goes out to anybody that is, in that type of scenario.
So how did it culminate when you decided that you had to finally leave?
Yeah, so it's obviously a question I get a lot. People want to know, why did you leave? And the nutshell is I always respond with people as I say, how much time do you have? Because it's obviously a combination of a lot of things. One of the key common denominators was the studying that I couldn't rectify the open-ended aspects of trying to justify. And I'll just give you one example. So there's a literary concept term called truth in translation. And this is an excellent value for all of your readership or listenership, is that we want to understand whether truth in translation was applied to whatever holy book that you or your family subscribe to. And all that is just an accurate scientific translation of the holy book you use. And there's a book called Truth in Translation that says, listen, I don't care about your ego. I don't care about your religion. I don't care about your background. What I want you to pay attention to is there even any fundamental proper translation that was applied to the book that you say is directly correlated with the manuscripts that it's allegedly translated from? Never mind the interpretation. Is this book even accurate at all? And so that would be one example of about 10 to 15 roadblocks that I hit where I felt unequivocally that I could not justify, based on what I was learning, based on what I was experiencing, based on what I was reading, that the inaccuracy was too great. The degree of inaccuracy is unacceptable, is just in the fundamental translation. So that would just be one example of many, many, many things. And just for the sake of a quick viewership, if you decide you can keep this in, is that I said to myself on Judgment Day, it violated common sense that a God would peer into your soul, Mark, and say, Mark, I know at the DNA and molecular level how you were composed. In fact, I created all of the programming. I'm responsible for it. I put together free will. And yet, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to judge you, Mark, as insufficient and permanently cut you off in an eternal destruction, whether it's in hell or just dead forever, because you fell short of rules and regulations built by man that I also created, whilst being able to know exactly what's out of alignment as I'm peering into your very soul. That doesn't make sense to me on any spectrum of any type of universe. And so these are just a couple of many things that made me come to the conclusion that I can no longer speak about what I've been speaking about for decades. When I say decades, I mean 3 decades plus. Mark, I can no longer put out all this rhetoric that is still anchored in these philosophies that just no longer make any sense to me.
And you were disfellowshipped after that. And this, of course, means, for anyone who doesn't know.
Sure. So an elder walks up on the platform and says, "This is to inform the North Lake congregation of Jehovah's Witnesses that Justin Cross is no longer serving as a Jehovah's Witness." And you can hear a pin drop, Mark. Static silence over the congregation. You might hear an elderly sister or two cry because they recognize that they can't speak to you anymore. It's like you just died. Get up after the song and you walk out and no one can talk to you suddenly overnight. And that stays with you. It's a part of your soul. You remember that pain and that embarrassment. And it's humiliating. And I think the scariest thing, Mark, is that they consider it a loving provision. And for the viewers who carry so much animosity, right? Something I still struggle with and I'm working through is how to remember that they still actually believe that it's a loving thing to do because it gives you an opportunity to be retrained, in my case by Jehovah God, so that this isolating experience is going to bring me back. But the truth is, it's made me more hurt inside and it's made me more resolute. And so the shunning process has failed. And it's failed to the extent that here we are talking about it to hopefully thousands of people, creating awareness of how much the shunning process is not serving us, Mark. I'm sure you see this so many times on your platform. You got to be wanting to just kind of.
Absolutely. I've even asked a Jehovah's Witness in the street with the cart, and I said, "What about shunning? Why would you do that?" And they said exactly what you said. They said, "Well, if you look at it, it's really a loving thing to do." Those exact words.
Wow. Look at that, Mark. It's just so sad. It's so hurtful. And it hurts with my family too, because I mourn the death of my loved ones, my own mom and dad and my sisters. I love them so much, but I know in their head, they're literally thinking we're really doing the right thing. And I used to think like that. How scary is that? Just a few years ago.
To be clear, it's even your family can't talk to you.
Yeah.
Not just the congregation.
There's a lot of controversy around that question. Here's the nutshell. If you look at the truth, most people break the law of what you're supposed to do. They just literally break it because it's family. I have not talked to my family in more than 5 years. And here's the reality. I want to share this. This is really deep stuff. I concluded, and almost nobody knows this. I told my mom, "Don't text me and don't call me." And I'll tell you why, Mom. You are my best friend. But when you contact me, first of all, it's only going one way with the communication, which is them trying to save you back. And that's hurtful. I don't want to hear from my mom once a year and it's only for her to tell me whatever you're doing is great, but come back to Jehovah, right? Nobody wants that. The next piece is, unfortunately, it's going to open up the wound again and hurt so much that we're not in each other's lives. It's going to put a spotlight back on the awkward nature of things, and then it gets much worse from there. The reality is if your loved one is then reaching back out to you and they're trying to re-engage you, it just creates an environment in which you feel like you're letting them down because you're not a part of what it is that's in their world. And this is the important part. I'll leave you with this, Mark, because it's so important. They are jeopardizing their eternal salvation by talking to you as they see it. Now let that sink in.
That clarifies things a bit. Yeah.
They literally are compromising because they're choosing to not side with Jehovah God, who makes the disfellowshipping decision. So it was God that ultimately removed me from the congregation. That's how they believe. I said, "Mom, stop putting yourself in that situation. Don't go halfway with it because that's like heartbreaking for her. She's jeopardizing her salvation for me. Why even do it once a year? Let's just think about it from a business perspective. Why do it even once a year if that's going to jeopardize her salvation and just be a one-sided, it's basically out of bounds. It's something you shouldn't be doing. My dad's been an elder for 30 plus years. So it's going to cause so much shame if she got caught and she just cries the whole time. So, Mark, it's just an overall tragedy, man.
Well, it was music that propelled you out of the limbo you were in after being disfellowshipped. And this was just the beginning of really finding yourself and empowering yourself.
For sure. I wish I could say that I was tough and resolute and locked in and determined to have an epic life, right? Which is what I talk about in my programs and my everyday life. But Mark, I was sleeping on floorboards and I could barely get up off the ground. I was so depressed. I had so much anxiety. I remember I came up with this title for myself, and the title was I'm a Proven Loser. Because think about it. I lost everything. I had a 6-figure business that I had run for 9 years that I built from scratch. I couldn't physically operate it because I had lost everybody. I didn't have the ability to know how to even go get worldly friends. Okay, I didn't even know how to associate because I was taught that that's wrong. I can't just call Mark up. I can't just start making friends. This is like trying to learn how to shift and you've never done a stick shift before, right? Then every
bubble for so long, haven't you?
That's what it is, Mark. Living in the bubble for so long. And then you got the holidays component, which breaks your heart every time that comes up. Your friends are getting married, they're having kids. I don't even know if I'm an uncle. I don't know because I haven't talked to my family in years. These types of things start pushing you so far down that on paper, you don't have God, you don't have your wife anymore, you don't have a job, you don't have religion. You go to pray. Mark, visualize this. You go to pray 3 times a day, like you always did. And you don't know if God has disowned you or if he's even a God. You don't even know if God exists because you're disconnected from him. So I wish I could say to you that I started off and just kicked ass, but it was a miserable couple years, man. And it wasn't until I reconnected with the passion of playing music that I was now just switched on. It was like this light bulb went off. Oh my God, I'm an old man, so to speak now, but I can still go start playing music. And that lit a fire under me, Mark, and I didn't look back. It drove me all the way out to LA and I found success with it.
It's all too sad. Love like no other can. Feel the breeze cut through the sun-kissed tree. Oh, what a find. The beauty of your mind. Live today. It might be your last, they say.
Okay, let's talk about your career as a motivational speaker and your upcoming guidebook for people shunned by their religious sects, Exile to Epic, which is a great name, by the way. All of this came out of living through and coming out of a destructive cult. And really, it's all about turning things around and using your experience to help people, wouldn't you say?
For sure, Mark. You summarized it beautifully. And, you know, I got this artificial sort of ego boost by being reintroduced to music because I had success very quickly. I wrote a couple of songs that got featured in Grammy magazine. I got offers to play all over in LA, and I actually moved to Los Angeles. I scored a feature film, and I was being on the trajectory of being a success. And I even had the good fortune through a chance encounter to open up a luxury men's custom clothing company with another gentleman and live on Sunset Boulevard. And so every day of my life, I literally lived across the street from Whiskey Go-Go. The Viper Room's across the street from me. I have a custom clothing company down the street meeting, you know, high net worth individuals. And for a little Jehovah's Witness boy to be able to make the clothes for celebrities and meet celebrities and things like that, this was huge in my little world, right? And so what I want to express to you is I felt like I had really rebuilt an extremely successful life at that time. And I said to myself, wow, I really did it. I'm living on Sunset Boulevard in West Hollywood, which is the premier part of Hollywood and Beverly Hills area. And so here's what happened. I was driving to a luxury event on the VIP list in a fancy pants, multiple $1,000 suit. And I'm thinking to myself, wow, I did it. I've made it. But the most ridiculous, profound thing happened that rocked my world and changed the direction of my life. I actually pulled over on Doheny Drive, sat there, and I noticed tears were coming out of my eyes. And I was like, I hope those are tears of joy. But I don't feel like they are. And next thing I know, I was weeping and I was feeling a full body sorrow coming over every part of my soul. And I said, maybe it's because I'm single. Maybe it's because I am just emotional or something. But I feel like I had literally beaten depression and anxiety associated with the shunning. I said, why is this happening? And it kept going on, Mark. And I said, what's the sadness all about, man? You're doing great. You're a success. I called somebody that grew up Jehovah's Witness. And through our conversation, she honestly just sort of haphazardly mentioned something, and it changed the rest of my life. I don't even know if she knows what she said. She said, Justin, remember, when we grew up, there were certain scriptures like the showy display of one's means of life, fancy car, fancy clothes, fancy success, originates not with God, but with the devil. And to store your treasures up in heaven, not upon the earth, right? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Mark, here's what happened. I was suffering from what I call in my program systemic subconscious belief patterns that were so deeply engraved on me, they become thought viruses, where I literally was living in a state of extreme shame about success and feeling successful. And this duality, this mind-blowing concept of thinking one thing and feeling something totally different was beyond scary and made me feel totally out of control of my life. And literally, I shot out of a cannon from that day forward and said, I am going to do a deep dive into what I built a six-figure company with, how I rebuilt my entire life, ex-Jehovah's Witness, and still entered the entertainment business and had success at it. Where in there is the common denominator of how to take into alignment the conscious part of our mind and the subconscious part of our mind to gain mastery over thinking and feeling in the same direction without fragmentation to truly actually enjoy the success that one is feeling. And I said, I have to be able to design a blueprint of the joy that I felt after going through that journey and studying all different types of modalities, cognitive behavioral therapy, the Dunning-Kruger effect, metaphysics, neuroscience, trying to really dig in deep. How does the mind work? How does the subconscious connect with the mind? Why do I need to know what my reticular activating system is doing in order to dictate my behavior? Because I didn't want to feel like that ever again. And it scared me, Mark, because that means I don't have control of the moment, right? And so what I did was I put together, I no longer wanted to feel exiled, and I wanted to live my epic life that I felt was a remarkable life, is the informal definition of epic. So if someone wants to live a remarkable life, I put together a blueprint, Mark, that I think your audience will absolutely cherish. And it is the foundational components of what you need to focus on if you're going through a high control group, cult shunning, religious shunning, mainstream religious fundamentalist shunning, any aspect or anything like that. And Mark, it's whether you're going to leave soon, whether you've already left, or if you're thinking about leaving. These are the components to protect your psychology and to have a framework of thinking that is not related to a religion. You don't have to be tied to whether you're a theist or whether you're an atheist or anything in between. This is a way to actually build the control over your own mind and your own subconscious mind. And so I'm just so ecstatic that you've given me the opportunity to make that available, obviously at no cost.
Right. So Justin, if I was interested in getting this right now, what would be the first thing I do?
Sure. Well, go to the website, www.exiled2epic. So exiled to epic. If you spell it wrong and you put in exiled to epic and you spell it all out, it'll still go to the same page. There's a little video where I summarize most of the stuff we just talked about here, and you can download the blueprint for free. And what I also did is I put in there a 45-minute video that goes in deep about all the components of the blueprint. And I send that out as just a bonus, just for people to expand upon that, simply because I want to give people the opportunity to know or have something to go back to, because this process takes, Mark, 7 years. The post-traumatic stress disorder associated with religious shunning is diagnosable now as a post-traumatic stress disorder. And if we can cut that down to a significant smaller portion of time, that would be an honor. And I wish I was cool. I wish I could say I did better, but it took me, this is basically my 7-year anniversary and part of the major reason I wanted to come on and talk. And I just couldn't take it anymore. I had to try to help the next guy or girl because I know it's just such a painful experience.
That's so impressive, and I think people are going to be very glad that you did. So that story you told us in the previous question there, that's really what propelled you to sit down and to create this, isn't it?
That's what it is. And honestly, that was only gosh, maybe a year ago, and I was thriving. And from there, I actually quit everything I was doing. If you look at my social media, you'll see on my sort of time frame or my timeline, I literally went on a 6-month sabbatical. Turns out I'm not the only crazy one. Bill Gates does a couple of months. Now I just need to figure out how to get even a fraction of his intelligence. But some of the best things you can do in life is take some time to yourself. So I went to Canada for about 4 months and I did studying. I immersed myself in the studies of the world that had to do with the brain and the subconscious, and what does it take for us to really take control of that? How does it affect us, Mark, when we are shaped from the ages of 0 to 6? When we have a certain amount of neurons, but a certain amount of neurosynaptic connections. And if those are wired in ways that we associate meaning to, it's literally shaping the entire rest of our life. And so how do we rewire those, right? How do we build a framework in which we are plugged in to a very clear, inspired life, not just a passionate life, right, but an inspired one, and so that we know on a day-to-day basis how to process our own emotions. And so I want to empower people to have a methodology to follow, to not have to carry on the burden of the shame, the guilt, the stress, the anxiety, and the overwhelm of building an entire new belief structure.
So I'm assuming that really you would begin with, I guess this is probably the wrong terminology, unlearning or deprogramming your previous life in the destructive cult, and then, as you say, kind of rewiring yourself.
Exactly, Mark. So I break down the subconscious belief patterns, which is a phrase that I have put together to just simply represent what's going on inside of us. And there's really 2 types of subconscious belief patterns. One is systemic and one is personal. And what I can leave you guys with here is that, like, for example, a systemic would be them saying you can't go to college because that's Satan's system of things. So that's a belief that was imposed upon you that's systemic, that's become a part of the DNA of what you believe to be your reality at a young age. Okay? Mm-hmm. But then you have something personal. Your own father, your own mother might have said, hey, you're just not good at math. And that's a personal experience that happened to you at school, that happened to you at home. Your own family can be either systemic or personal. And so I'm helping individuals sit there and say, what is the disconnect between why I'm thinking something and feeling something else? And what are the drivers, right, that make that possible, right? Because beliefs become thoughts, thoughts become feelings, feelings become actions, actions become results. And so that doesn't care what religion that you came from, that those 5 primary drivers don't care where you come from, what you've studied. It's ruthless. It follows that journey. So how can we build new beliefs, and how can we know within that structure why we're feeling the way we're feeling? So that's what I love exploring, and that's what I hope is creating some value, for anyone listening.
But anyone listening who's going to get hold of Exile to Epic, they will have to be prepared that they're going to have to look deep inside themselves and pinpoint things which perhaps they'd rather not go near.
Mark, thanks for bringing that to the fore. I will say that something that will warm your heart is one of the specific exercises that I do with some of my private coaching clients is we do a custom visualization of their ideal perfect day. And would you believe me if I told you that there's a lot of tears involved when they literally allow themselves post-shunning to visualize exactly what they actually want? And there's a lot of shame that comes up. And all that exercise is about them simply choosing, believing, thriving in an environment in which they see a perfect day. What does it look like? What does it smell like in the room? What are you doing? Who are you with? Who do you wake up next to? And the emotion that pours out has really showed me that this is so mandatory to do, because we're just not good at it when we get out, because there's so much trauma. We feel like victims instead of victors.
Right. Well, a huge thank you for taking the time out of your schedule to talk to us. I think that's fantastic what we've been talking about today and what you're working on. And I'm sure a lot of people will want to follow your work. So if anyone wants to look into your music, your talks, and of course the Exile to Epic Shunning Survival Kit, they can go to exiletoepic.com and justincross.com. Isn't that right?
That's correct.
Okay, I'll put links to your websites and all your social media in the description below. And all that's left to say is thanks once again, and hopefully we can do a follow-up sometime later in 2020.
I would love it, Mark. And once again, just thank you for creating awareness about, quite frankly, and quite literally, the entire international sort of like movement of cultism and the aspects and components that we need to be aware of from a sociological perspective of how harmful cults can be, and just the awareness in general. You've been an inspiration to me. Thanks so much for having me on.
Thank you so much, Justin.